Hello there, this is Dimitris Christou and I'm back with another Blender video tutorial. For this video tutorial we're going to see how to build nice abstract stuff in Blender. And what I'll try to do is put you in the mindset for creating abstract scenes in Blender. Now when I tried to put together an image for my blog over at graphicsdaily.blogspot.com, there are times that I have a clear idea of what I want to build, and there are times that I don't have some inspiration or some idea about what I want to build in Blender. What I then do is try to experiment, try to work with the tools that Blender has, with modifiers, cycles, renders, settings, materials and all that. Let's begin with our humble cube here. And I'll move over to the modifiers to take a look. I'm going to click Add Modifier and I will add a subdivision surface modifier. Now it's good to add a subdivision surface modifier on an object, not just to smooth it, but what also happens is that it adds more geometry, more faces and vertices on an object, so you can use them later on when applying further modifiers on your object. I'm going to click Add Modifier and we have our cube here. Well, it looks closer to a sphere now, and we're going to add a wireframe modifier. Let's see what happens. Now you can see the wireframe modifier, and wireframe modifier takes the edges of the object and creates a nice wireframe object. You can see it right here. As I said in a previous video tutorial, it's pretty important to position the modifiers on the modifier stacks properly. Now let's see what happens if I put the wireframe modifier above the subsurf modifier. And as you can see, what happens here is that we are getting the cube. Okay, you can see the cube right here. And then the wireframe modifier is applied on it. And then the subsurf modifier adds more, smoothens the wireframe modifier and then adds a few more faces and vertices for us. Now I'll bring the subsurf modifier up. Alright, and what I'll then do is add another subsurf modifier. Okay, let's try to smoothen the wireframe modifier now. Alright, I'll bring the view subdivisions up to 2. Okay, looking good. And what I'll try to do now is add displace modifier. Click Add Modifier and let's add a displace. Now the displace modifier needs a texture so it can push and pull the vertices and the faces of the object according to the bright parts and to the dark parts of the texture. So I'm clicking New for a new texture. I'll move over to the texture options and we have the displace. You can see that we're editing the displace texture right here. And I'm going to change the type from image or movie. Let's set it to clouds. Now clouds is a pretty flexible, pretty easy texture to add when using the displace. You can see the cloud settings here. I'll bring the size up so that we're not having the small chaotic changes in bright and dark parts. Let's bring the size up a bit more, about here. Okay. And I'll also increase the depth a bit. Let's set it up to say 6. Okay. As you can see, we're having something that is worth exploring, that it's worth trying to take it one step further and see what we're getting. So I'm back to the modifiers and I'm going to add another subdivision surface modifier. Okay. I'll also click Smooth to take a look. Okay, and this one looks pretty interesting. Now I would, and I might explore this one further, but for now let's delete the subsurf modifier, the bottom one. Okay, and what you can also do here, and what you have to do in order to build those abstract scenes, is experiment. You have to experiment, you have to be playful, you have to go over to the modifiers and see. Be curious about modifiers and see, let's try the Remesh, let's see what the Remesh will do now. What the Remesh modifier does here is that it rebuild the object by using those settings right here. We have the sharp mode. What I'm going to do is uncheck the remove disconnected pieces so that the Remesh modifier works on the entire object, and you can see that we're having something interesting here. What you can also do is change the mode. Let's set it from sharp to blocks. Okay. And we're getting something entirely different. You can also increase the auxiliary depth to add some depth, add some more detail to the Remesh object, and you can see how this one looks. Now if we were to move with this one further on, you can, let's try to add a simple deform modifier, and you can see we have the twist modifier applied on our object. We have twist, you can see it right here, and we have the angle set 45. You can use bend, and you can see how this one bends the object. You can increase the angle, and let's set the deform, let's set it to 180 for the bend angle. And you can see that we are having again a nice interesting object to work with. And for this one you could also say add some bevel. Okay, and this adds some nice beveling here on the object, and you can see that it looks pretty interesting and breaks that cubic uniformity of the object. Alright. Now this is an interesting object as well. Okay. Now I'm going to delete this. See something else? I'm hitting delete and delete the cube. And what I'm going to do now is do another thing that I did a few days ago when I was trying to figure out what to build in Blender. I'll hit Shift A and add mesh, move over to Math function, and I'm going to click on XYZ Math surface. Now the XYZ Math surfaces are very interesting objects, very nice objects that you can use as a startup for your abstract scene in Blender. I'll move over to the settings here, and we have the operator presets, and we can see we have lots of options here, lots of objects we can start our image or scene with, and you can, and perhaps you should, try each and every one of them. Now let's see the Dini one. I've put together an image using this object, and it's a pretty interesting shape, pretty interesting geometry here that you can use for your scenes and all. And I'm going to move over to the ABS one, and you can see that this is also an interesting shape and something that I wanted to explore further on. Now another tip here, well, is that when you see all those settings, and as you can see we're having lots and lots of settings for the XYZ function objects. Now when you see those settings on the left corner here, now for some this might be intimidating, but what also happens here is that you should not always see the difficulties of the settings and the complexity of the settings. You could also see some opportunity here. And when I'm talking about opportunity, that I mean that when you see lots of settings, that also means that you have many ways to modify your object, to create object variation, and to use different settings to create some nice little objects for your scene. Now we're having here this interesting shape, and what you can do is move over to the Vmax. Let's move over to the Vmax, and this object might appear a bit differently in your Blender, but let's change the Vmax here. Let's bring this one up, and you can see what we're getting. This is an interesting kind of, let's set it at about 6 point something. Okay, and as you can see we're having here a nice twisted torus sort of thing that looks pretty nice. Okay, now what we can do, I'm hitting 7 on my numeric keypad and then 5 for the top overview, is what we can do to build a nice little abstract scene here is build different variations of the same object and see how this one goes. I'll hit Shift A and add mesh, move over to the math function and select the XYZ Math surface. I'll hit Z and X and move it on the X-axis. What happens here is that if you try to manipulate the object or move it on any axis and all that, you're losing the settings here, so I'm going to hit X to delete. And I'm going to move this one, Z and X, and move this one to the side. And then hit Shift A, Mesh, move over to Math function and select the XYZ Math surface. Now this is the first object and we're going to try and add some variation to it by bringing down the Vmax setting. Okay, and you see what we're getting here, and this is totally different to this one. Well, actually not totally different, but we're getting some nice variation here, and this is pretty important. What you can also do is bring the V step down. Let's bring it down, and by bringing the V step down, we are bringing down the faces for the width for the object, and you can bring it down at about 4 or 3 or even 2. Let's see. When we are at 2, what we're getting is simple two-face sides of the object, and this one looks pretty interesting as well. Okay, let's move this one to the side, Z and X, and let's add another one. Shift A, Mesh and Math function and XYZ Math surface. And I'll bring the Vmax up and the V-step, let's bring it up a bit. And let's try the Umax. Okay, the Umax is the one that builds the object, is the one that puts the faces close to each other to create this nice little shape. So we're going to leave this one at about here. Okay, let's leave this one to 0. And as I said before, you have to experiment. Now this creates an interesting result. I'm going to bring the, let's see, the V minimum for the object here, and this creates a nice interesting result. Okay, I'll move this one to the side as well and hit Shift A and add Mesh Math function and XYZ Math surface. Now I'm going to bring the V step up at about here. What you can also do here is change the U step, and the U step is the definition of the object in the side here around the object, and we can bring this one down. Okay, we can set it to 15, and you can see that we're getting a totally different, well, not totally different, but a nice little variation on the same object. Let's bring this one further down, and you can set it to 4. And as you can see, this object here, this setting here, tries to create a nice little plane here, 4-sided, so that we're getting a nice abstract object. Now what you can do on those, and we already have some nice variations, some nice cool objects for the scene, is that we're having something to work with. And what we can do here is work with the modifiers. As you can see, we're having these objects here without even trying to work with the modifiers. So let's move over to the modifiers. We're selecting this one and we're going to, let's add a wireframe for this object. I'm going to bring the thickness down. Let's set it down to at about 0.05. Okay. And selecting this one, click Add Modifier, and what we can try on this one, let's try another wireframe on this one, and what we'll do for this object here is bring the thickness up, so we're getting a thick wireframe. Okay, let's set it to 0.6. Okay, now for this object right here, what I'm going to do is click add modifier, and I'm going to add a Remesh modifier. Let's see how this one looks with the Remesh. I'll set it to blocks. Okay, let's see how it looks, and I'll then add a wireframe modifier. And again, I just try stuff on this. Okay, this one looks good. I'll just bring the thickness down a bit. Alright, and for the fourth object, let's see it. What I'm going to do here, let's see what we can do. I would like to add some depth to it, so I will add a solidify modifier, increase the thickness, and that creates a nice, pretty interesting result on our object. Let's bring the thickness up to 3 or something. Okay, what we can now do is add materials or objects and all. Let's bring the thickness of this one up a bit, and what we can do now is hit Alt G on this one, select this one, Alt G on this one, select this one, Alt G on this one. I'm hitting 7 on my mirror keypad for the top ortho view, the Del key, the comma key on my keyboard again, and I'll hit Ctrl Alt and 0 to roughly position the camera at the place I look. Set the X and Y to 0. Okay, let's move the camera back a bit. Set it to 20. I'll switch over to Cycles Render. And I'm going to click Use Nodes for the world settings and bring the color up to a nice bright white. At about here. Okay. Let's render a scene to see. And again, for this one, I haven't used any materials at all. Feel free to use your own materials and create your own system. This is just an example. This is an example of us taking pretty similar objects and just changing the settings to create variations on the same XYZ function, and then trying to use some modifiers to add some further variation to the objects in the scene. And as you can see, we're getting a nice, interesting result that it's worth investing some time and worth taking it some steps further and working with it. Now this scene right here and this workflow right here is actually the one that I've used on this image. And this is what happens here. I have the XYZ function put together, and I've created some nice variation on the objects, and then add lots of modifiers on them, find something that I think looked interesting, added materials, added lighting. We have a part of the object here that uses an emission material and lights the scene, and that is what happened when I was putting together that image. And actually I didn't have a clue about what I wanted to create up until I found this interesting XYZ function. This is what I'm trying to tell you. What you have to do is try lots of stuff, is to experiment with your tools, with modifiers. I think that's it. So this is the scene. I'm going to take a final look so you can also see it. Alright, looking interesting. So this is Dimitris Christou. I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial. I hope it kind of puts you in the right mindset or in the mood to experiment with the tools in Blender, and thanks for watching.